Hey guys, in this video we're going to go over a tier list sort of all of the armor stacker builds that I've tried in 3.24. I have tried pretty much every single meta ascendancy, also doing some other non-meta ascendancies and different build types, experimental build types with different defense layers and this kind of stuff. So I do think I have a pretty good understanding of all of the different type of ascendancies or defenses you can use on these kind of builds. So I'll be making this tier list kind of thing. We'll go over some of the strengths and weaknesses of some of the different build types, ascendancies, which one might be suited to you, for you, and that kind of stuff. Hopefully watch this video if you don't know which one to try or which one to play. Then after you watch this, you might know sort of which one to pick. Alright, so let's jump right into it. First of all, we have two different sections here today. We're going to have the life builds and some ES based builds. So I think these two we should separate these because they do build a lot differently, and some classes perform better on the life version than the ES one. So for the life based builds, the best build in the game is going to be the Juggernaut using Unbreakable. Pretty much just because Juggernaut with life-based builds has probably the best synergy because of things like Untiring, giving you tons of life regen. My Juggernaut got all the way up to like 10k life regen in maps just by being hit, so that was pretty insane. You start off at a base of like 3000 ES regen or something, pretty crazy. So, and damage is pretty insane on these life armor stacker builds because you don't really have to do things to reduce your mana cost for your Grace Blessing, so it's a lot simpler to build. You just go grab Eldritch Battery, and it does make things a lot simpler. It makes gearing a lot easier, and definitely very good build on the Juggernaut. Right, so for the ES builds, we have the Scion Transcendence build and Chieftain build. So these two builds are probably going to be the best ones that you can do for energy shield based builds. Scion Transcendence actually is pretty much outperforming all of the other classes by quite a bit, and there is sort of like a misconception, I'd say, about like Chieftain has more damage than Scion, and we'll look at a few POBs later on in the video, but that's not really all that true. I think maybe at certain budgets Chieftain might be doing a bit more damage, but long story short, Scion actually does more damage than a Chieftain with one sword. So basically doing more damage with only one replica Dream Feather. And if you did put on 2 replica Dream Feathers, then you're pretty much just like doing twice as much as Chieftain. So I think Scion does have a lot more damage potential, but it is harder to get to that damage, right? Because you need the mirrors, you need tons of money to actually get Scion to start outperforming these kind of classes like Chieftain. Also, yeah, so Scion Transcendence probably has like the highest max hit out of all the builds. The Scion also does get access to the Guardian Ascendancy, so it has the highest ES regen out of all of these armor stackers, and that's usually the main weakness that people say about armor stackers. Well, if you're playing a very high-end Scion Transcendence build, then degen pretty much isn't a problem because you're going to be having like 4000 to 5000 ES regen, and that's way more than enough to take care of any kind of degen pretty much. So Chieftain, the Chieftain build, basically this one is like you want to play an ES build but you don't want to play Transcendence, then the Chieftain build is the one you're going to play. Extremely high damage on the Chieftain due to like the different kind of perks Chieftain gets. We'll go over that later in a bit. And like we mentioned before, it in like lower to medium sort of budgets, Chieftain does outperform Scion in terms of damage, just because it's a lot cheaper to get damage on a Chieftain. That's one really nice thing about Chieftain is you don't really have to pay tons of mirrors just to get your damage. It's relatively easy to get the damage. Alright, so let's actually go over the real tier list. So this is the ES tier list. At S tier we have Scion Transcendence build. Then we have the Chieftain ES build. Then after that on the A tier, Juggernaut. B tier is going to be our Scion Max Block build. And then the Lightning Coil Transcendence build. And on the C tier, we have the Trickster and the Doriani's prototype build. Alright, so Scion Transcendence, like we went over, we just talked about this, but we'll go over it a little bit more in detail here. Scion Transcendence, basically this is pretty much, it has pretty much everything you want in the build at the high end, you know, end game budget. It has the damage, it has the defense, it has the sustain, pretty much everything you'd want in a build. So that's why it's pretty much the best version of the build. I think if you have the currency, this one is going to be the one to do. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the stats of some of these builds. So the one I'm talking about is this build over here. And we're going to be talking about builds from like these high budget variants. So basically, let's just take a look at like our actual endgame one over here. So we have two setups here we can configure for damage. You can see at the top end 1.2 billion DPS while still having relatively high max hit values and that kind of stuff. The regen on this build is about 4,500 to about 5,500 ES regen. So very, very, very cool. You can set it up for quite a lot of damage if you want. And another more defensive POB you can use is going to be something like this. You'll have about 450 mil DPS, but incredibly high max hit with 90 max res Transcendence, and still having, this one also has about 5,500 ES regen. Right, now I did have a couple of these. These are kind of experimental builds where you can see we're not at 100% physical damage taken as, we're at 99%. Now technically this does actually work. You can check this out here. You can see this can get up to like 1.7 billion DPS using two swords. The only downside to this is, you know, you only have 99% max, physical damage taken as combined. It's actually impossible to get the last 1% unless you had flask effect. And then also when your flask is down, you do take quite a lot of fizz damage, so that is one downside. So I did try this out actually, and it was okay for a lot of things, but there's just a lot of things that are just going to one-shot you, especially if you're doing Valdos and that kind of stuff. So I ended up not really liking it. It's just kind of interesting kind of thing you can actually do and go one-shot some bosses before they actually do anything. Maybe that's what you would use it for. But yeah, not really that useful in the real world. I think most people are going to be running this tank setup over here like this. Okay, so for the Chieftain ES based builds, we have some over here. We're going to be talking about the high and these giga budget builds over here. So if we take a look at the endgame Chieftain build, you can see we have about 1 billion DPS overall. Now this is using the Soul Ascension gloves, and so this is actually getting a lot of damage from the Soul Eater stack, so the actual damage might be quite a bit lower. If you did use a pair of rare gloves, you might have pretty much around the same sort of DPS, maybe a little bit less, but this is pretty much, you know, what you're going to be getting. About 1 billion DPS, and max hit value is very nice with about 300k on the elemental, and you know, 120 or so on the fizz, so that's quite nice. You can increase your fizz by quite a bit by just changing up some gearing, but overall very nice. But like we mentioned before, the top end still is actually quite a bit lower than the Scion build that is only using one sword. You can see the one sword Scion build can get up to 1.2 billion, whereas the Chieftain one is kind of capped out at 1 billion. Now maybe you can get more on your Chieftain. It probably depends on, I think you'd probably remove your Molten Shell and then add in a totem probably. And then you might be getting probably about the same amount of damage as the Scion, or maybe a little bit more. But I think, yeah, so they probably are about the same. But basically, yeah, one sword, Scion does like the same amount of damage pretty much with one sword as Chieftain. So it's kind of funny. So that's why I was saying, yeah, the Scion does have the highest max potential DPS, right? Because, you know, the reason is pretty much is, I think, well, first of all, the aura effect Scion gets, the extra aura effect from the Ascendancy. Then you also get the Intimidate and extra damage to Taunted, so that's like 20% more damage. I think that's pretty much it, actually. And then the extra talent points, right? So you do get a lot to do a lot more things with your talent points, so that's kind of why Scion does pull ahead in these sort of really endgame min-maxed builds. Alright, so we have the Juggernaut build, so the ES Juggernaut build. Now this one, don't really think this is even worth playing, honestly. You're probably just better off playing a Chieftain. And I did actually make this originally because I thought this, like, budget version was going to be really nice because you don't have to go buy unbreakable jewels and that kind of stuff. But if you're going to be playing a budget build, you should probably play one of the life-based builds that we'll go over later, because those are actually going to be outperforming these low-budget ES builds by quite a bit. Alright, so let's take a look at the endgame Juggernaut build. You can see our DPS is sort of capped at about 600 million DPS. Now this is with like full double, like, BIS items, right? You got our double corrupted Nimbus, double corrupted Mageblood, like nothing has been spared here, right? And all of the endgame POBs we'll look at are all going to be having sort of the same kind of items, right? The best items you can get. And you can see his damage is quite low compared to something like we just looked at, the Chieftain. Basically, yeah, not really even worth playing a Jug at this level, because you could just play a Chieftain and have double the performance pretty much. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the B tier builds. It's going to be first of all, the Max Block Scion build. This one I actually liked quite a bit. Basically, this one has Max Block with no glancing blows, so basically 75% of the time you just don't take damage. And then you have 100% spell suppression to take care of any damage that comes through. But, that's not really enough for a lot of big hits. Like, if a big hit comes through, you're probably going to die. But it does feel very nice because of all the sustain you have. You have all the ES regen from Guardian, and then you have the Aegis recovery, and then also you have the max block with no glancing blows. So very, very nice. Also 90 max res, so degens are not really that much of a problem on this build. But yeah, let's take a look at it. So we have over here the build. Highest energy shield you'll probably see on a armor stacker this patch, 6k ES. Max hit values not very high. You can see the elemental hit quite low, 140k. And then we have about 130 million DPS. Now this isn't really using really end game items either, because I do think if you're going to be doing this on a very high end, you should probably swap over to a Transcendence build. That's why I just didn't really make the actually complete full BIS gear item. And the main reason is if you did this on a very high budget, you probably want to get voices, and once you start getting voices, this is where you get a lot of your block. So you're going to lose a lot of your block, you're going to lose a lot of tankiness, and then this build will start to not really perform as well, I think. So you're probably better off just going to a Transcendence build. But for a medium kind of budget, you want to play Scion, ES build, Aegis Aurora. That's just pretty much as good as it's going to get. Alright, next we have the Lightning Coil Transcendence Scion build. Right, so here it is. So you can see about 66 million DPS, 2k ES, very low. Max hit, not all that great. So this build is something that I did very early on in the league because I bricked my Grasping Mail craft. And I didn't really have a Grasping Mail. I didn't really want to go and buy another one and craft another one, because I'd spent like 2-3 mirrors crafting it, or like 2 mirrors or so I think crafting it up to that point. And then I just kind of made a mistake and basically deleted the item, so kind of broke, and decided to just swap over to this because I wanted to go do mapping, and I couldn't really do mapping on my previous setup. So this one is actually pretty decent. I'd say the weaknesses of the build is going to be that you can see the max res quite low, so that means degen is sort of a problem. You see ES value is also very low, but it does have a lot of enough max hit to take care of a lot of the hit based damage, right? You can also configure this to have a lot more maximum resistance, right? So when I was playing with it, I was using a POB similar to this, right? So I had a utmost instead of the ashes, and that did give me quite a lot more max res. So the problem with degen is you need to have a high max res, otherwise degen is a problem. So if you have tons of regen, it doesn't really matter if you're, if you have like 5,000 ES regen but only 80, 75 or 80 max res, you're still going to be taking a lot of damage from degen. So getting your resistance to 90 is first, that's going to be the best thing that you can do against degen. So there's a lot of things you can do to customize this build to make it feel better, but overall it's just kind of like, I don't know, not really that good, I'd say. Like, it's the only reason I played it was because, like I said, I bricked my graspy mill, and it was actually something I wanted to test out, see how good it was, and it was pretty good. I was farming T17s on this pretty good. You know, damage wasn't super crazy, and it still did die a lot of times, but I think it did end up working out okay, but not really something that is like really amazing or very good. So that's why it is down in the B tier. All right, next one. This is the C tier build, the Trickster build. Honestly, like, this is actually a big problem for energy shield builds in Path of Exile right now, is there isn't that many good defensive solutions to the build, right? So this Trickster build basically is just spell suppression, right? Spell suppression and high energy shield pool. You can see we have about 50 mil DPS, like very low. Then we also have you know, 180k elemental hit, Fizzmax hits. Okay, so it's like kind of okay, but it just, first of all, doesn't have the damage. The defenses don't really feel all that good either, just spell suppression and ES doesn't really feel good. And yeah, this is a big problem for energy shield builds. You don't have things, you basically either have to go Transcendence or have Unbreakable, or it's not really viable, I think. You know, for life-based builds, you have things like Fourth Vow, Eternal Damnation, you have Petrified Blood, Progenesis, you have Incandescent Heart, Divine Flesh. There's so many different things you can do on a life-based build to mitigate damage, you know, past your resistances. But for CI builds, pretty much the only things you have is going to be, you know, like Transcendence and Unbreakable. Maybe there's some other things, or like Spell Suppression. So ES-based build, very hard to pull off on Armor Stacker, and pretty much I think you just have to play it on Scion or what do you call it, Marauder. So like, why Scion, right? Like, why can't you do Transcendence on like a Chieftain, or can't you do Transcendence on a Pathfinder, this kind of stuff? Well, first of all, you're not going to have a lot of damage if you did any other ascendancy besides Scion. Like we just saw on the Chieftain versus Scion, the Scion was doing the same amount of damage with one sword than a Chieftain with two. So if you did Transcendence on a Chieftain, well, you're just going to have half the damage of Scion, pretty much. Second of all is your regen. So Transcendence builds, you need very high regen, because a lot of times you're not going to be at 90 max res. And, you know, the downside of these Armor Stacker builds, a lot of people say, is degen. So you need, first of all, high max res and a lot of regen. And if you play any other ascendancy besides Scion or Guardian, you're just not going to get the regen, ES regen, because you don't have that scaling for energy shield regen rate. So pretty much there's like no point to play a Transcendence build on anything else besides Scion, I think. The moment there's like no real benefit to do it on any other ascendancy. So anyways, so a little bit of a rant about ES, but basically that's kind of why this Trickster build didn't really turn out that good. It was kind of an interesting experiment. Crafting the gear was kind of fun, but overall not very good. Alright, so for the life builds, S tier is going to be the Juggernaut on the Unbreakable Juggernaut. And then we have A tier, we have the Divine Flesh build. This time I only tried it on Champion. You could do this sort of build on a lot of different ascendancies. We'll talk about that later. And then we also do have on the A tier the Chieftain using Unbreakable. And then we also have the B tier Chieftain, Juggernaut, Fourth Vow. Well, I guess it doesn't really have to be Chieftain or Jug. It could be a lot of other ascendancies, but basically just a Fourth Vow setup. Alright, so let's take a look at the S tier Juggernaut build. This one is pretty insane on life-based build. You can see the Juggernaut here, full, end game build progression, 1.4 billion DPS with 300k elemental max hit, 100k fizz. Pretty insane. You could still configure it for more fizz max hit, but reason why this build can get actually just so much more damage than the energy shield version is, well, first of all, you don't have to do the annoying things of like setting up a Divine Blessing with your getting reduced mana cost of skills, because this build is using Eldritch Battery over here. So basically that just takes care of your Divine Blessing. You're able to just you know, skip all of these points you would have to go take to get reduced mana cost of skills, and a lot of your gearing changes as well, where you don't really need to get reduced mana cost of skills. So you have a lot of other affixes you can add to your gear, which is quite nice. And then also allows for different pathing for, you know, picking up more items. You can see this one is using 4 1 passive voices, just because it has extra points to, what do you call it, to pick up all of these other jewels and gem slots. And this is just like crazy, right? But like on a more realistic budget, this is the build I actually did play on the Juggernaut. Here, there's links for all of the build guides if you want to go check them out in the description. But see, like 450 million DPS on this kind of budget here with no voices. That's just insane, right? Like, for comparison, the 1 passive voices Juggernaut build, fully bis, is about 587 million DPS. So you're pretty much getting the same performance as a multi-mirror build on this build that's not even using voices or any kind of mirrored items, which is pretty insane. So this build, this life jug build, is completely like blowing all of these mirror tier builds out of the water, which is pretty insane. So I'd say this is like one of the best builds to play for Armor Stacker. All right, now you might be thinking, well, why don't we just do this on a Chieftain, right? So the life-based build, all right, it's got to be better on a Chieftain. And well, not really, actually, until you actually get to the real like end game, like we're talking about with the bis gear, then Chieftain is a bit better. You can see about close to 1.6 billion DPS on the Chieftain. But if we take a look at the medium budget here, damage is quite a bit lower on the Chieftain version. I think that just has to do with, you know, Chieftain has to go pick up the Unbreakable jewel. So that means we do lose access to things like we're using the Rational Doctrine, right? So we lose out on Rational Doctrine. Also, Chieftain doesn't have Untiring like the Juggernaut has. So Chieftain actually does have less regen, so less sustain than a Jug build. And honestly, like, if you're going to be playing super like endgame version of this build, let's just open both of these out over here. I would easily sacrifice 100 million DPS to have Untiring on Juggernaut. So overall, Juggernaut just better when it comes to life-based builds. Is probably the best life-based Armor Stacker build you can play, and actually probably the best one to play if you're like an SSF as well. Or like, you know, on a tight budget, just Juggernaut is the best one to play on all budget levels, I'd say. Right, so we already went over the Chieftain life-based build using Unbreakable, so let's go over to the next one. We have the Champion Divine Flesh build. So this one is one of the last ones I made, and this one actually ended up being like really nice. Right, now you don't really have to do this on a Champion. This can actually be converted to almost any other Ascendancy. And you can make it work. But for the you know, the build I tried was on a Champion. So, and I do think Champion is actually really good for this specific kind of build using Incandescent Heart and Divine Flesh. Basically, this build just converts 75% of the damage, elemental damage you take, to chaos, and then you reduce that by 10% by your armor. So you end up getting quite a lot of elemental damage mitigation, similar levels to Unbreakable. Elemental penetration is sort of pretty much like not a problem, because you only get penetrated on 25% of your damage. So it ends up being very tanky, a lot better than a 4th Vow setup, just because of the, you know, 75% of the damage is getting mitigated by your armor instead of 50% with a 4th Vow. So this build, what to say about it? So it's good, right? It could do like a lot of end game content, like T17 maps. You can do follows. It pretty much just like one shot the feared. Able to get very nice damage on the Champion with this is with Smite. All the other POBs we were looking at were with Molten Strike. So if you did Molten Strike on this, it would be pretty much double. So about 200 million Molten Strike DPS, I could say. Very nice. It is a little bit annoying to build because you do have to get your max chaos res. You can play this 2 versions with 2 swords and then 1 with a shield that will give you pretty much 90 chaos max res. and then you end up getting very, very tanky. You can see the max hit on the shield version is about like 200k on elemental, 84 on fizz, and then the sword one is about 160k on elemental and 80 on fizz. So you can kind of swap it around to whatever you're doing. Maybe even have a weapon swap, right? So you have a weapon swap with a shield and then another weapon swap with the 2 swords. You can swap around with those. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, this build, very, very good. I'd say if you wanted to play Armor Stacker on Ascendancy other than Marauder, you're going to play a life-based build, this is the setup to do for endgame damage reduction. Ends up working out the best. So yeah, I did like try this on a witch. Even you can see there's a witch POV here, 84 mil DPS on the witch. Quite nice, you know, very interesting. See what it looks like on a Scion. So you can see champion actually does do more damage than the Scion in this certain scenario, and like, cause you know, like we talked about in the beginning, Scion has the highest maximum potential DPS, right? And that only comes with investment, extra currency, and that kind of stuff. So for this level of a build, champion is going to be outperforming Scion in that case. So very nice ascendancy to build with on these kind of like lower to medium budget builds. Okay, so last build we're going to look at is going to be the life-based builds using the 4th Vow. So we have one on a Juggernaut that I did, and then we have one that we did on a Chieftain. So this build wasn't all that good, guys, honestly. I mean, it was good for how cheap it was, but the damage reduction you can see is still quite low, only 130k elemental, 75 fizz, right? DPS, like, you know, it's kind of the same for all these kind of life-based builds. Only thing with Juggernaut actually did it pretty nicely, because you can see you can combine Unbreakable and 4th Vow and get quite a lot of max hit over here. 250k elemental and like 88k fizz, so that's quite nice. Nice thing about 4th Vow is you don't have to invest into max chaos res. It's very simple. You just put it on, you allocate Divine Flesh, and you're good to go. As long as you have around 80% chaos res, you're going to be getting pretty much the full effect that this armor does. It doesn't really scale better if you add more max res. I mean, it does, but not by a lot, right? So it's not really even that worth it. Pretty much just better off increasing your life or your armor values to get more max hit. But yeah, it's okay, right? It's like, it's not as good as the Incandescent Heart setup, but it's probably a lot easier to set up because you don't have to invest in max chaos res. All right, so that's pretty much all of the builds. There is one build that I think is kind of like a bonus kind of build we'll go over. So this is the Aegis max block no glancing blows build, but done on a Guardian. And one thing that's kind of interesting with this is if you take these Fanaticism jewels or Instruments of Zeal, you get Fanaticism. And so what is Fanaticism? Right, so we can see on the wiki here is Fanaticism is a buff that grants more cast speed. Okay, we don't really care about this, but look at this. So reduced cost and increased area effect of skills. So we only really care about this, reduced cost. Grace, Divine Blessing is a skill. When you have Fanaticism, your Grace, Divine Blessing is going to be reduced by 75%. So that means with Inspiration, just with Inspiration and Fanaticism, you're good. You don't have to invest into reduced mana cost of skills. So that makes Guardian very, very unique in that you can completely bypass the, all of the other gear and talents you would spend on getting reduced mana cost of skills. Now, I haven't actually tried this out in game, and it might be very clunky. It might not be all that good because it does take like 4 seconds to get your Fanaticism charges. So after you attack, you start getting the charges. So it might be a little bit not all that cool to play. Who knows? Maybe I'll try it out next league. But this is kind of interesting because of how you can get around the reduced mana cost of skills by using the Fanaticism kind of thing, which is quite nice. And it also does say that you gain a fanatic charge each second if you have attacked in the past second. It doesn't say you have to actually hit something, so you could probably just attack anywhere, like in your hideout, and you'll start to get the charges. All right, so interesting, very interesting thing you can try to do. And that'll probably be it for the video, guys. There's still quite a lot of different POBs and stuff you can go check out in the Armor Stacker Compendium, and to help you on your journey for building your armor stacker. But that'll be it for this tier list sort of overview of all of my builds. But yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.